This is More Than Money with Mapalo Makhu, brought to you by Sasfin Wealth.
Welcome to More Than Money. I'm Mapalo Makhu, a personal finance columnist, and I love having money conversations that change people's perspective about finances. Why am I doing this podcast, you might ask? To talk about money. Not the paper stuff. I mean the baggage, the feeling, the emotional, heart-wrenching stuff. We find this conversation so uncomfortable to have, which is why on this podcast, I have decided to have this very difficult conversations. We are going to have some difficult discussions because better money conversations lead to better money confidence, and healthy money dialogue leads to healthy money decisions. Today, my guest is Bonang Mohale. He's an author of Lift As You Rise and is currently the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. Bonang, thank you so much for being here. What an honor to be speaking to you.
Mapalo, thank you very much. But I think you have my old brief resume because I'm now the president of Business Unity South Africa for the last 2 years.
For the last 2 years. That is amazing. You have such a fantastic resume. You know, I thought if I were to read it out loud, we'd spend half the day here. So today's conversation, I want you to forget all the roles that you've played in corporate South Africa. Today, I want to get to know Bonang Mohale and your relationship with money. So take us back, all the way back to your upbringing.
So I am one of 6 other siblings, born of poor parents in a township called Binoni. We moved, I think, when I was about 6 to Katlehong. I'm the first son, but I'm bang in the middle, 5 girls and 2 boys. My other brother, Kirienzeng Basotho, ki number 6. So there's 2 boys and 2 girls. I didn't even know that we were poor because all 4-roomed houses look the same. Only the people with money will then put a little bit of a stoop, big windows, and a gate that closes on its own.
Yeah.
Not because it had a remote control, but because they used the mattress spring to yank it back after you have pushed it open. So I grew up exceptionally happy.
What was it about your childhood that you really thoroughly enjoyed?
I think spending time with both your parents. My father was working, but Saturdays and Sundays he was at home. My mother was the entrepreneur, but he's the one who taught us everything. He taught me everything. I mean, one of the most profound things I remember about her is that cleaning and cooking and washing dishes, it's a basic life skill, not a gender role. So she would say to me, You need to learn how to cook so that when you are married one day and your wife can't cook for whatever reason, then it's your turn to look after her. And since then, I have this incredible passion about cooking, but also about serving, because I understand that those who are the best amongst us do so by helping others. Because if you're helping others, you're fulfilling God's work. We are at our best when we serve others.
Absolutely. And now you got married at a very young age, at a tender age of 19, I think it was?
17. I can't say that aloud.
17?
I needed my parents' consent to get married. But the one that's even more crazy is Miss Susan. She said, yes. I look at her now and say, what were you smoking?
And Miss Susan is your lovely wife. Why did you want to get married at such a young age, if I may ask?
I think I just loved her. And my mind was made up that this is the lady that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And I haven't been too wrong, because on the 24th of August last year, we celebrated our 41 years of happy marriage.
Wow, 41 years later, that is incredible. But before we get into that, Bonang, I just want to go back to your upbringing. You said that you were poor, but you did not realize that you were poor. But of course, there was a time when you realized that, hey, I come from a family that is struggling financially. When was that realization?
I suppose it came late because we always had new shoes, mostly around Christmas. They would buy us school shoes. not fancy shoes, to prepare for
Yeah.
January. So that kind of prepared me that, if you execute without strategy, that strategy is probably aimless. So I learned the art of strategy practically. And when I realized that I could be useful, I then decided that I wanted to help my own mother because, like I said, she taught me everything. She taught me how to put a stoop with sand and cement and stones, how to plaster a house, how to plant mealies and mukopu, and how to cook, but also how to clean.
Yeah.
But also, we were using a welcome Dover stove.
Yeah.
My job was to chop the woods every evening, even if I did not necessarily have to prepare the fire for that day, because her narrative was, when these girls want to prepare the fire, the wood must be ready. So we don't want to call you from the streets. So whenever I came back from school, the first thing I would do, chop the wood so that as I'm playing soccer on a dusty field with no shoes, that I'm not called to come and chop the woods, but also to fill the bucket of coal at that time.
What did you study in university and why did you study that course?
I think that's when I realized that I could be more helpful, absolutely, because I went to Vets Medical School, MBBCH. First year, I needed special ministerial consent to study at a white university. That's when I became aware for the first time about issues of social justice. That came around April. There must have been about 27 of us who applied. The minister only said yes to 11. I was lucky to be one of those 11. But I remember my interview with the late Professor Philip Tobias, who used to teach us anatomy. And he had published 7 books on anatomy. When he asked me, why do you want to become a doctor? I said, I was thinking of a course that I could do in the shortest period of time that will give me the most amount of money so that I can help my mother. She said, you know what, you are in. I hear lots of sob stories. I want to help mankind. I want to alleviate disease and suffering. So you probably honest, go in. And that's how I got in.
Having spoken to him in that interview, did you think that medicine is the shortest course? Because we know that medicine takes up to 7 years or more. How did you fund your studies?
In fact, I was balancing 2 things. It had to be short, but it must give me the most amount of money, not just short, and then I'm still poor. So in my township in Katlehong, the people who drove the biggest cars, a Jaguar with 2 liters, who lived in the biggest houses, were clinicians. The lawyers were probably second in line. So it took me 6 years of hard study, and of course you do your internship. But what I then did when I was at school to prepare for this, I was selling apples and oranges. Oranges I'll just put on the fence, and people would throw a stone when they ever wanted to buy. You didn't have to market it. But apples, I would go to Simpani station. We lived in Katlehong. I took a train and I would buy them in Simpani and sell them on the train coming back. 9 out of 10 times, by the time I get home, a whole box of Granny Smith would be finished. So that's what I did. And then later on, I bought my first camera called Halina 1000. I would then take photographs. The theory was simple. I charged you the full processing and development fee, which was 50 cents as a deposit. I would take it to Frips or stands at that time to be developed. It took a week, not these instantaneous things. And then when I give them the next film, they'll give me the photographs of the last week. And then when I give you a photo, you give me the last 50 cents. I suppose that was my margin. So it was quite profitable. So by the time I got to matric, they call it grade 12 now, I had 5 cameras.
Yeah.
My best was a Nikon F1. I remember when I bought it, I paid exactly the same amount of money for the body only without the lens as a BMW 318i. By the time I was in grade 12, like I said, I had 5 of these. I had a Canon AE1. I had a Pentax. So these were useful pieces of machine. So I would go to parties, I would go to weddings, I would go to, each time I went to school, the first thing I would put on my shoulder will be a camera on the right-hand shoulder and then my books on the left-hand shoulder. So during breaks, I would take photographs. And 80% of my customers, funny enough, were not guys, but kind ladies.
You seem that you were very enterprising from a very young age, and I guess that's how you put yourself through medical school. So were you married by the time you were in medical school? And if you were married and studying, how was that relationship?
In fact, I was married. I went to Wits 1981. Susan and I had married the year earlier. She was living at her place, I was living at my place. It was important that we were married. For me, I didn't think where I'm going to put her, what are we going to do? But off to school, I was. But what I really remember of that time is the amazing focus that it gives you, because you now know that there's two of you struggling through this degree and you have another human being to try and look after. And I look back and say, no wonder that in my early 20s, I was able to buy a stand and started building. We went to Alberton, Shachat Homes at that time. We chose, I think, almost 3 plans. I was the first in my family to own a bonded house, not a municipality house. By the way, to end, these photographs helped me, because when I said to my uncles, I want to get married, they thought I was smoking something. And then, to cut a long story short, they said, okay, we will go and ask for this lady's hand in marriage. Kasuto bane ba ilo kopa sikipili. And then they said, so how much do you have to give us? I said, no, you tell me what is decent. They said, how about 10,000 rand? Because they were hell-bent on dissuading me from getting married. So I said, 10,000 it is, yes. So I went to my steel cupboard, which was in my bedroom. There was 1 bedroom for boys, 1 bedroom for girls, in a 5-room house at that time called Hlapho 1403. So I opened and I came back and I counted 10,000 rand in cash and I gave it to the 3 uncles. I mean, their jaws dropped. You can see that a lot of them had never touched 10,000 rand in cash.
And when they mentioned that, obviously it was to deter you from this mission that you had, and you had 10,000 rand back then.
To save at that time was so incredibly easy, because you'd buy an A3 cardboard from the post office. That was just a box with small postage stamp size bits, and then you'll buy a 5-cent postage stamp and you stick it onto this box. When it's full, it was 1 rand. You gave them the box, they gave you a savings book. They would write your name by pen, and they take the rand and write 1 rand in words and R1, and then the postmaster will sign it with a wooden stamp dipped in ink to make it legit. That book was full when I was still a pupil. Today they are called learners. So by the time I went to university, I had 3 of these books. So when my uncle said 10,000, I traded one of those books. I got my cash and I gave it to them in cash.
So now you are in university. You are married to Miss Susan. What was the conversation like between the two of you about your future?
No, it was absolutely profound. I mean, we talked about solving the problems of the world at that time. You know, when you're in love conquers everything. So it's no surprise that when I started at Wits 1981, later that year she had our daughter, Nkgono Tshepiso. 1982, she went back to finish her matric because she passed, but she wanted to improve her maths and science grades, which she did. 2003, then she joins me at Wits. I remember the fees at that time. Tuition was 1,720 for me. I stayed at Glen Thomas House inside Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, another 1,720. And then I had to do the same to pay for her and her fees. So we went to Wits 1983 when both of us were already husband and wife, but we stayed in 2 separate rooms so that at least we can pretend to be studying. Glorious time of my life, because I got to spend all my time with her, although Saturdays and Sundays were to go home to look after Tshepiso at that time. The responsibility that came with it was mind-boggling. But because you are in love, it didn't even feel like hard work.
Yes. And now you have a daughter at home and you're both studying. How did you finance being parents?
So it was with some difficulty. I continued with taking photographs, and then there was a doctor friend of mine who was also in same medical school. We used to call him Dr. Splortmabe later on, S-P-L-O-R-T, such were his initials.
Yes.
So I persuaded him to buy a kumbi, like a taxi, that I would drive when I come back from medical school. And then I would take all the people that worked at Chicken Licken at that time, because Chicken Licken and KFC closed at 23:30. So I would study, and then at 2,300 hours, drive his kumbi to go and collect them, and used to pay me weekly. And with that, we were then able to buy our daughter clothes, but also cow and gate powdered milk, like Clean at that time. So, I mean, I still get goosebumps just thinking about it, how we were responsible, loving, doting. But I must say, I got lots of help from our parents because, you know, if you are a child in Sesotho and you go to school, the parents say, bring the little one here, we'll bring the little one so that you can concentrate on your studies. So Susan's parents lived with Nkgono Tshepiso, and then over the weekends would then take her to Mohale, Mpe, Moradi wa Bakwena, Letebele la Mthimkhulu wa Bugama.
So now you are taking photos, supplementing your income. Were you expected to give back to your siblings at home and help out?
Oh, totally. Because ka Sesotho, moshanyana wa matsibulo ke thakantatae. So the firstborn son is your father's elder. So I knew that my responsibility was to look after myself and Susan. That's why I got married early, so that she can help me. But also the 3 siblings that came after me, I said to them, you can go to school as much as you want. You will never have to stop school because there is no money. Again, that's that type of focus and singularity of purpose. And I looked after them absolutely without any hesitation. What really helped is that they were trying to study. We were trying to make some life for ourselves. We would always come home for the holidays and weekends, but we realized that it's not sustainable. That's why we went to Boyas View at that time and found a piece of stand, paid 3,000 rand as a deposit to the stand, and then Shachat built our home. And again, the first house that we built had a bathroom inside. Instead of washing in my basin outside and then take it inside whenever I wanted to drop my pants. Now I could feel the water in a bath. I would sit in there with Susan and Sepiso, the 3 of us in a bath. My mother, I remember when they came to see this, the only thing that was complete in that house, as apart from the bricks and mortar, was the kitchen, because the kitchen had the assembled cupboards. It had an under-counter oven, a glass hob, and an extractor fan, all in one row. I mean, I really felt like absolute royalty. And all of this from the sweat of our own brow with Susan. She was still studying, by the way. I bought our first car at that time from a lady who sold me a Volkswagen Beetle for 600 rand. And Susan said, but where are we going to park this? I said, no, but my friend just bought a car that is 5 years older than this one for 3,000 rand. If this lady is selling to me for 600 rand, it's a good thing. Susan said, no, and I didn't buy it. So you can see that even that early on, I knew exactly who the boss was.
And I was about to ask, what were the money conversations that you and Susan were having at that point? Were you thinking about budgeting together? Were you talking about where are we going to take our daughter to school? How are we going to pay for the fees? What was the conversation there?
No, not at all. In fact, whatever little money I had was to buy furniture for my mother. We are the ones that put electricity ko 1403 ko Nhlapo, because we had to go and apply for this. They would come, those concrete slabs, and then piped it, and I would go and get it connected. And so we had electricity. But also because the doors were open, now I'm married, I had to put the actual doors where you can actually close. So I did most of the things. I mean, I bought the first stoves that when you went to a train station, you'd see them advertised, not welcome Dover, but the ones with a canopy. And they would advertise them as smokeless stoves. And then they had a glass panel through the oven. You could see this whole chicken that was being roasted. So I bought this stove, took it home, and when they delivered it and they fitted it, and I said, and where's my chicken?
You thought it was going to come with the chicken.
I genuinely thought it would.
They should have just put the chicken in there.
But I must say that my almost 42 years of my happy marriage to Susan is the best decision I've ever made in my entire life. Because I look at her now and say, God is great.
You are listening to More Than Money, a podcast collaboration brought to you by Sasfin Wealth. At Sasfin Wealth, we empower our clients to reach their global investment goals, to retire with dignity, and to leave a lasting legacy. If you would like to have real money conversations, visit sasfin.com/wealth and talk to us. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Now, you finish university and you go into, I think, what they call that year of residency, and you start earning some money. Do you remember what you guys did with that first paycheck?
No, in fact, I was bad. Instead of going to do my internship or housemanship, I realized that, when I passed fourth year. Now I'm into my fifth year. I was listening to a radio to an African guy who was so articulate, talking about big things about leadership, the late Maduke Lottenloof. And I said, I wanted to be like this guy. And I knew that at that time, as a manager, you can touch 20 people at the time. Rather than being a GP, it's one person at a time. So I never did my internship. I went straight to work for Pfizer with a P. They now make vaccines. I spent 5 glorious years. I started as a professional sales representative. After 5 years, I moved into product management, new business development, and then an export manager. But my first car was a Toyota Cressida L. I still remember the registration GVY 379T. I drove Susan in this and took her to Lesotho to say, I want to show you my father's village. I'd never been myself. So we drove to Maseru border. We went asking people, where is Mohale's hook? Until we arrived. Because the world was much safer at that time. We crossed a river called Mohale. And I saw my father's rondavel at that time with thatch roof. And I said, this is our home. And it was my first visit ever. The issues of budgeting, actually not much. I remember my paycheck when it came. I now have a car. We have this house that we are trying to build by Shahat. We're paying bond fees. And it was truly beautiful. No furniture at all. I had one table that I'd made through handwork, I think at school. I bought a TV with a bunny aerial that you could move around to check the strongest signal. Whenever people came to visit, none of the bedrooms were furnished. Remember I said the only thing that was fully furnished was just the kitchen. We had a sofa that during the day would sit 2-3 people at a squeeze, and then at night I would open the sofa up, it became a double bed, and then we'd use it for sleeping. Not even building cupboards, even though they were on the plan. So we started feeling these things as and when we end. But in the most joyous, glorious manner and absolutely ecstatic. I look back and say, you know what, I'm still besotted to her now like I was even then. And of course, we went on to make sure that she had qualified as a social worker. I used to drop her off at school. But my greatest achievement, I suppose, was to make sure that Tsepiso started at the township schools like all of us. She probably spent maybe 2-3 years there. Because I was already working, I took her to a private school called St. Dunstan's in Benoni. I mean, what I paid for her in 1 quarter was more than what I paid for myself and Susan for 13 years of schooling each in just 1 quarter. And she's turned out okay. She's now have 2 masters. One from Instituto de Empresa in Madrid, where she lived for 2 years in international MBA. The second one in luxury marketing from the International University of Monaco, where she lived and had an apartment in Monte Carlo. I said, no, we have arrived. My little one, I think, wanted to run away from us. She went to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver for 4 years, a 22-hour flight. I think she wanted to be so far away from us. So after 4 years, she came back with an honors degree. So now I think they can look after themselves. I can throw them anywhere else in the world. They should be able to survive.
What were some of the lessons you taught them, maybe consciously and unconsciously, when they were growing up about money?
So I didn't even know that I was teaching them. Only now when they tell me, Tsepiso would never let anybody bath her during the day. And she would say, no, I'm waiting for Papa. She used to call me Papa. And I always bathed with her until she turned 13, until my mother-in-law told me to stop. I didn't see anything wrong. The second thing is that I would take them to a restaurant every Friday. And I would say to them, and it came from Susan, to say, I know you can't read, but look at the pictures. Whatever you like, you choose. But once you have chosen, at least make an attempt to eat it. So that was the first lesson, to say, you choose, there are consequences. The second lesson that we taught them is that whenever you are taken out by somebody or with a group of friends, please try and pay at least your portion of the bill. And if somebody else takes you out and say, I'm paying, please don't choose the most expensive thing on the menu. And the last thing, I think I taught them to be themselves. They used to do sleepovers and etc. I used to say to them, even when you are working, remember this, whenever you have done a sleep out or even at a nightclub, when you feel uncomfortable, for whatever reason, you just call me. I will come and fetch you. I will not ask you why. That's the deal. I'll just come and fetch you. You know, Tsepiso had her own car. She used to go to a club here in Rivonia, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, she would call me, and I've got board meeting the next morning, and say, Dad, and I say, yes, would you come and collect? And I say, I'm coming. And I would jump out of bed, put on my gown, and then go and collect it. And when I come back, Susan said, but she knows you have a board meeting the next day. I say, she knows, but remember, that's the deal. I said, whenever you feel uncomfortable, you just call me. I will never ask any questions. So they grew up as two powerful warriors of women, knowing that they are listened to, their decision matters. We would never buy a house without consulting the four of us. If any one of them didn't like the house, we didn't buy it.
So it was a collective decision as a family always. When you and Susan started out, you didn't have a lot of money and you built both your careers. When you realized that, hey, things are quite comfortable now, was there changes in terms of how you communicated about money in your family?
No, I don't think it did. And yes, we did become comfortable. So the time I knew that I was comfortable, it's when Susan and I managed to buy my own mother a house in the suburbs. And we paid for it cash because we still were paying our own bond at that time. And in fact, we were moving from Bedfordview to go and buy in Cape Town. So we bought a house in 1999. And in Leondale, 3-bedroom house. This was a major achievement. And then 3 years later, we then bought her parents a house also in Leondale, 3 streets apart, so that my 2 divine daughters could run from the one house to the other without even needing transport. So now my mother has a house of her own. My in-laws have a home of their own. That's when I felt, you know what, now I could be comfortable but not relaxed. I could still be restless, but I knew that major mission has been accomplished. And then lastly, early on, we used to have only one car. I would take Sue, drop the little one, drop her at work, and then on Fridays, they would go for drinking sessions. I would say, no, I have to go and fetch Susan because she was a social worker in Thokoza. Drive from Sentin all the way to Thokoza. By the time I'm with her in the car, I had no desire to go back drinking with the rest of my colleagues. I would really just take her home. And even today, I'm still happiest when I'm with family. We still take holidays together everywhere we go. By the time I turned 40, we had been to 100 countries. So those are the things that I hold near and dear in my own memory. And even today, my daughters know that it's not the bricks and mortar, it's not the pieces of metal that we have, it's the moments that we share together. When Tsepiso turned 21, the mother bought her a BMW 318 Ti, the one that looks like it's been cut at the back, absolutely brand new. She didn't drive it for 3 years because she was at UCT, and the mother still dropped her off every day at school. So when she completed, she traded it in for an Audi A6 that she drove every day, sometimes 3 times a day because she chose it herself. So we always bought 4 cars. Now, whenever we change cars, we buy 4 at a time. And that has really given me a lot of joy.
Yeah.
But I look at them and you see that they still value that which my own grandmother taught us about being rich as having money, but being wealthy as having time. So Maneo bought an apartment of her own in Ilovo on the same site as Gibbs, but every Friday she comes and has a meal with us. That's when I'm in heaven. That's my happy place.
Now, talking about your daughters, how did you manage to instill in them that hard work is important, that getting your own things is important? How did you manage that together with Sue?
I wish I could take the credit, but you know, husbands are absentee fathers. I was busy mining gold and Susan was bringing them up with values and good ethos. I think she did an incredible piece of work in bringing them up. That's why today I look at her every day and say, can I get you something? What do you need? And she doesn't ask for much. Susan is happy when all 4 of us are traveling and seeing the world, not in having things. So the one thing that we now share is that they are voracious readers. They teach me how to pronounce words because coming from Bantu education, of course, I would still say development, I still say broccoli, and they tell me the correct pronunciation of those things. But also they've taught me the intersectionality between gender, race, and class, and the sensitivity that, especially as a man, the language that you use, how you hold yourself in public spaces, but also how you create holding spaces for others. That's how you become useful and how you get joy. Because they read so much. They share with me what they read. I share with them what we read. And we extract one or two things that we have learned. The one thing that has always driven us as a family is the fact that I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to become. That the past does not define who you are, but where you want to go defines your accomplishment and achievements. And if you set your sight to it, not even the sky is the limit. We are black, we are African, they are female, I am male. But in our mind, there are no limits about what we can achieve. And you can see these warriors as they walk around London, and they are in Madrid, and I walk with them in the streets of Paris, and they go to the Louvre and looking at art on the wall, that they are absolutely fearless. And they know that there is nothing that they can't be and accomplish with hard work, dedication, will, and determination.
What about your family? So you mentioned that, you have sisters, you have your parents, perhaps cousins even, what they call black tax or family tax. How have you handled that together with Sue?
So Susan and I would never use that ugly word, black tax, because we understood and we have internalized this, that our parents didn't buy policies for us when we were young. They couldn't cash these when we turned 18 so that when we go to vets, we could drive our own Volkswagen Beetles. That they invested their time, energy, and effort in us. That these black parents sell their 3 cows in Limpopo so that these girls can go to Terfloop to get the degree, with the express understanding that they must look after themselves, with no expectation that they should look after them as parents as well. I mean, that's what makes it so glorious. So when you go to school and you earn and you look at your parents and say, of course I want to put them on a good medical aid. And I want to make sure that I do stuff for them the same way that they sacrificed everything for me. That's why for us, the first house we built was for ourselves. The second one was for my mother. The second one was for my in-laws. So that we always, when you go to bed and we pray, we say, do we know what our parents are eating? If we are not sure, we get onto our bicycles to go and buy so that we go and deliver it to them. Every month, we used to buy them groceries because we knew that's our moral obligation. That's why parents bring you up, so that you can better look after them when they're older. My father, I've just lost my father-in-law through COVID in 2021, and he was almost 83 years old. He lived with us. We cared after him. We loved him. We would never think of sending him to an old age home. It's our turn to make ourselves useful. My own mother passed away on the 27th of November, 2015, living in a beautiful home, 3-bedroom house. She was still strong. She still swept her own yard. A meticulous, vicious woman who'd tell me where to get off. Each time I went to visit her, she'd say, can I prepare you something to eat? And I said, no, I'm from my own house. I've got my own wife. She's prepared something for me. I said, okay. And then she'd whip up eggs. Even though I told her I just had breakfast, because to her, I was her son, period. But when she passed away, Susan and I looked at ourselves and said, she wanted for nothing. That's what we wanted to do. Thank God we did that. So to us, it's the whole family that sacrifice to take you to school. I mean, look at the economy of Zimbabwe. There's 12 million of them. 5 million are outside of Zimbabwe, shared between South Africa and Botswana. What holds that economy together is the ones that are working, and they take their money and send it home. And the ones at home, they also go to school to become chartered accountants, because they understand that you lift as you rise. That there is no point in achieving on your own when you leave the rest of the family together. That's why Sesotho is so wonderful when it says it takes a whole village to bring up an African child. That these sons learn by looking at the back of the heads of their fathers. That you always want to glorify and honor the name of the Mohale clan. You don't ever want to shame it. That's why you want to build a homestead, so that Haliesa Mikid, you can go home and say, Habo Runaki Mo. And you do that because it's your job, the same way that the sun knows it is his job to come up in the east and set in the west, whether it's overcast or not, whether somebody sees it or not, whether we appreciate it or not. It does so in KwaZulu-Natal, where they grow sugarcane, but also in the deserts of the Namib, where it looks like it's not appreciated, because everything that nature does, it never does for itself, but it does for others. Therefore, when you have something in a family, the whole opportunity is for you to be the other-centered. I mean, that's what leadership is about. It is not an opportunity to enrich self, but a privilege to improve the quality of lives of others. And charity,
those around you,
like clarity, begins at home.
What would you want your legacy to be?
So one of the things that I didn't talk about as we taught our children is that I grew up and my father passed away when I was 17. I'd never heard my father say to my mother, I love you. I never heard it. And because of that, I say to Susan, I love you 3 times a day so that my daughters can hear it. I would never finish a conversation with Tsepiso without saying, I love you, my sweetheart. I would never finish a conversation with Maneo without saying, I love you, my angel. And I never write them a WhatsApp message without finishing by saying, I love you, my angel. I love you, my sweetheart. And I've always finished it with hashtag, please be safe, so that they know that I'm always there for them. So I wanted them to hear me say to their mother, I love you, many times a day, so that they feel comfortable about it, because it was strange to me. That's the legacy I wanted to leave. But the other legacy is that I wanted them to know that our parents tried hard, in spite of where they come from, and in the wake of what we are facing these days, would never go hungry. That the little one would never make a call about anything. And I say no. And Susan will say, at some stage you have to say no. I say, I will say no when it's necessary. I would never say no just because it feels right to say no. Can we go out to a restaurant? I say yes. Can we go out to them? I say yes. Can we? I say yes. So they said, but they didn't even finish. I said, but I've already said yes. They said, no, we're going to holiday in one of their most favorite places, is Madrid. And we're going to holiday. I said, yes. And so we're going to find the money and say, now that I've said yes, we go and work. But the yes preceded. The 4 of us lived in one house in Bryanston. We've been in this street for 19 years. So one day she looked us in the eye and said, no, I want a place of my own. It hurt like hell. And Susan looked at her funny. And I looked at Susan, she wasn't saying anything. And I said, yes, my angel. And at the end, Susan and I spoke about it and said, but we will miss her. I said, but that's what it means to grow up. At some stage, you have to leave the nest. Yeah. Because that's what we learned. I mean, as parents, you say, come to the edge, I say. And the children say, I'm afraid. You say, come to the edge, I say. And if they don't, you push them when you think they are ready to fly. And as you push them, instead of plunging to their death, they exercise their wings and they soar like eagles. But you will know when it is ready. So she's the little one that left. So she's probably been living on her own for 6 years. Nkgono Tsepiso still lives with us. I'm not complaining. I love it every minute, because most of the time she'll be buying an apartment in Madrid. She'll be buying an apartment in Monte Carlo. She'll be visiting. So she's hardly ever here. She hasn't spoken about, I want a place of my own yet. But when she does, I know what the answer is going to be. Yes. Even though I'm going to miss her and I think I'm going to die. But that's what nature is. It's called the cycle of life.
Do you have any fears around money at this stage?
Huge fears. I've always had fears about money. One of the things I feared more than anything else is poverty, because I know what it is like to be poor, even though I didn't appreciate it then. Therefore, I don't ever want to go there. I don't believe that the good Lord can give you the 2 hands and the 2 feet and the ability to think and reflect, and you don't use all of those to bring yourself out of poverty. I'm a good Catholic boy. And as a Catholic, I also believe that 1 Timothy 5, chapter 11 says, a man that cannot look after his family is worse than a non-believer. My job, my whole reason for existence, I understand it to be better able to look after my family. And you look after them in many ways. It's not always about giving them money. It's about giving them time. It's about being there for them. It's about seeing them grow up. As I end, I remember what my grandmother used to say to me, that when you give money, you give a lot. When you give time, you give much. But when you give of yourself, you give everything. I've given everything to my lovely wife, Susan. And I've given everything to my two daughters. And they know that when I'm there, the world is a much safer place.
Oh, Ntate Bonang Mohale, what an incredible human being. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for gracing us with your wisdom. I have thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Now I know that you've been well brought up, because I think for girls, their first love is their fathers. Because in their mind, they model what type of husband they are searching and looking for. Therefore, it allows them to comfortably say no, 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 until they find one that closely approximates that which is better than their own father. Then they go and replicate it in their own families. There is nothing more painful than to go out in the world and you don't have a mental picture of this lifetime partner that you are looking at. And I'm hoping that in the few months that I've spent with my daughters, I've given them a model of what it is like to come back from work and take off my tie and wash dishes, because they make me uncomfortable, not expecting anybody else to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing yourself.
I am touched, humbled, and honored.
This was a Sasfin Wealth podcast. Visit sasfin.com/wealth for more information.